The boss is 3 seconds from killing my entire party and I'm just standing there smiling. Nobody notices yet. They're too busy screaming. The tank is on the ground with his ribs caved in. The mage is out of mana and crawling backward through her own blood. And the S-rank vanguard who's been humiliating me for 6 months, the guy who told the whole guild I was dead weight in a healer's coat, is about to eat a hit that will turn him into paste. That's when I raise my hand and heal him. The healing doesn't look like healing. There's no soft green light, no gentle glow. My palm turns black, veins climbing up my arm like cracks in glass, and the wound on his chest doesn't close so much as it gets ripped away, siphoned out of his body, and dragged through the air toward me. He gasps like he's been stabbed a second time. In half a second later, the boss's skull detonates. Not exaggeration, detonates. Chunks of bone and dungeon core matter spray across the arena, and the 20-foot whore that was about to wina, and the 20-foot whore that was a Bergkampf. So when I tested into the guild as an E-rank support class, they took me. Nobody expected much, as if even the system that built the entire magical hierarchy of this world looked at what I was and went, "Yay, we don't have a box for that one." At first it didn't matter, because on paper my healing output was garbage. I'd cast a spell on a wounded teammate, and instead of their wound closing fast and clean like a normal healer's, it would just sort of sit there, barely moving, painfully slow. Guildmates would groan, roll their eyes, mutter that they'd rather bleed out naturally than wait on me. Drayson Thorne, our S-rank vanguard in the guild's golden boy, made it his personal hobby to remind it, the part I didn't even fully understand yet myself. My healing wasn't slow because it was weak. It was slow because it wasn't actually healing in the way anyone assumed. It was doing something else entirely, and it took me almost losing my life to find out what. That happened on a routine job, an E-rank swamp dungeon, the kind of assignment guilds throw at rookies to pad monthly quotas. Low risk, low reward, nobody important goes, which meant nobody important was there to see what happened. When a low-tier dungeon glitched and spawned a mutated bog serpent, 3 tiers above its supposed difficulty, it nearly killed the 2 juniors. Had also just rewritten everything I fight. I also just rewritten everything I fight. And what I found out made my stomach drop every single time. The rule was simple, and it was brutal. The worse the wound I healed, the harder the retaliation strike against the nearest hostile target. A scraped knee healed into basically nothing, a flick of static that wouldn't bruise a rat, but a wound that was actually life-threatening, the kind where someone's a heartbeat from dying, that healed into something closer to a war crime. My class didn't fix people, it weighed their suffering and it made something else pay for it. I started calling it, in my own head, the toll. Every heal had a cost, and the cost got paid by whatever monster was standing closest. The bigger the injury, the bigger the bill. And that meant the trash healer everyone laughed at was sitting on something that could, in the right situation, drop a boss in a single cast. I just needed my allies to almost die first. Which is, if you think about it for more than 5 seconds, of us went in. Drayson led the vanguard, Ren Calloway, our S-rank archer, and honestly the only person in the guild who'd ever treated me like a human being instead of a punchline, ran Overwatch. I brought up the rear with the healing squad, exactly where Voss wanted me, exactly where nobody would notice what I actually was. I was thinking about the toll. I dropped to my knees next to Drayson Thorne, the man who'd spent 6 months calling me deadweight, and for one very ugly second I thought about not healing him at all, about letting the guild find out the hard way. What happens when you throw away the person who could have saved you? I'm not proud of that thought. It lasted maybe half a heartbeat. Then I put my hands on his chest and I healed him anyway, because whatever else I am, I'm not the kind of person who lets someone die to prove a point. My arms went black past the elbow. The wound in his side didn't close so much as it got torn free, dragged out of him in a visible ribbon of dark light that whipped across the room and slammed directly into the bone cantor's open singing mouth. The explosion cracked 3 pillars and knocked half the squad off their feet. The cantor staggered, half its rib cage. The cantor staggered, half its rib cage. The whole strategy for the last 6 months had been staying invisible, staying underestimated, and in one panic decision I'd just torn that entire plan apart in front of 11 witnesses and a guildmaster who was going to have a lot of very uncomfortable questions. Later I said, which is the worst possible answer to give a man who just watched you turn his near death into a weapon. Right now we finish this. Ren was the one who, in the open, in full view of the entire remaining squad, and let the toll do what it does. The retaliation strike hit the cantor's exposed skull dead center, and this time there was no reeling, no staggering. There was just a body made of bone and stitched horror falling apart in the air mid-collapse, gone before it finished hitting the ground. We'd cleared an A-rank dungeon boss. Ashvane Company had its certification, and every single person standing in that cathedral was staring at me like they'd never actually seen me before, which in a way they hadn't. Guildmaster Voss found his voice first, and it came out sharp, suspicious. What exactly is your class? I opened my mouth to lie because lying had kept me safe for 6 months, and every instinct I had told me to keep lying now. Then Drayson of all people stepped in front of me, arms crossed, side still healing under his torn armor. His class draped. His eyes stayed narrow, calculating the look of a guildmaster who just discovered he'd and I wasn't invited, which told me everything I needed to know about how that conversation was going to go. I caught the tail end of it anyway because Ren tracked me. I want to reclassify you, she said. No preamble, because Ren never bothered with preamble. Voss is pushing to have you registered as a combat support hybrid instead of standard healer, means you get pulled off rotation duty, means you go on every high-value raid from now on, frontline adjacent, positioned specifically so your heals can double as strikes. That's not a preamble. It's not how it's supposed to work, I said, which was true and also completely irrelevant, because guilds don't care how something is supposed to work, they care how it can be used. I know, Ren said. I told him that. He didn't care. She hesitated, and for a second the careful mask slipped, something closer to actual worry underneath it. Rowan, the way that class works, from what I saw in there, it needs someone almost dying to get strong. You understand what that means if Voss builds strategies around it? It means someone on this over and over, because it's efficient. I hadn't let myself think that far ahead yet, and hearing her say it out loud made my stomach turn in a way the actual dungeon fight hadn't. 6 months of being mocked, dismissed, treated like dead weight, and the first time anyone in that guild saw real value in me, it came wrapped in a strategy that required my friends to bleed for it. I won't let that happen, I said, and I meant it, even though I had no idea yet how I was going to stop a guildmaster who'd already decided what I was worth. Good, Ren said, because I'm not letting it happen either. Whatever this turns into, you're not doing it alone. That should have been a comforting thought. It wasn't, not entirely, because the next morning Voss summoned me to his office alone, and the first thing he said when the door closed behind me had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with ambition. The Ashvane Company has been sitting at rank 114 for 2 years, he said, not looking up from the paper. Do that and I'll make sure nobody ever calls you dead weight again. And if I say no, Voss smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. Then I suppose the ranking committee finds out we've been sitting on an unregistered, unclassified support anomaly for 6 months without reporting it. That's a violation, Vale, a serious one. For the guild, and for you personally, he let that sit in the air between us, cold and the moment they finally understood what I was worth, the very first thing this guild did with that knowledge was point it back at my throat. I stood there in his office, black veins long since faded back to ordinary skin, looking every bit like the harmless E-rank healer everyone had spent 6 months laughing at. And I thought about Ivy in the swamp dungeon, about Drayson's ribs cracking against that pillar, about Ren's shoulder torn open under my hands, about every single almost that had gotten me here. And I thought about the S-rank dungeon core Voss wanted me to clear, a place guild scouts whispered about, like a graveyard, a dungeon that had swallowed 3 separate top 10 guilds whole in the last 2 years, and never let a single one of them walk back out clean. Fine, I heard myself say, I'll do it. Voss's smile widened, satisfied, already counting the sponsors, where the toll would finally get paid in full. Then they were about to learn something that 6 months of mockery had conveniently let them forget. Standing directly behind the one person in this guild who could turn their worst moment into someone else's last one, and I was done being quiet about what that meant. The S-rank core had a name, whispered more than spoken. The kind guilds only say once and then never again. They called it the Cradle, and 3 days from now, Ashvane Company was walking into it, with me at the center of a plan built entire. I didn't know that its true boss had been sealed there for a reason nobody in Voss's paperwork had bothered to mention. And I definitely didn't know that the moment I stepped through its gate, the guild that had spent 6 months underestimating me was about to find out exactly how much worse than dead weight I could be. That part of the story starts with a scream, and it isn't mine. The cradle's gate looked wrong the moment we stepped through it, less like a dungeon entrance and more like a wound in the world that hadn't finished healing. The sky inside was the color of a fresh bruise, and the ground pulsed faintly under our boots, like we were standing on something with a heartbeat. 20 of Ashvane Company's best walked in behind Voss that morning. He'd brought everyone. Drayson at the front, Ren on Overwatch, Ivy the scout I'd saved my first week discovering what I really was, tagging along on her first S-rank assignment. Practically, she earned her spot, he said, already moving past me. Everyone earns their spot, Vale, including you, including me, like I hadn't been dragged here with a threat hanging over my head. I swallowed the argument because arguing with Voss had never once worked, and followed my guild into a dungeon that swallowed top 10 teams whole. The first 2 floors were quiet in the worst way, the kind of quiet that makes veteran adventurers check their weapons twice. Ren caught up to me somewhere around the second floor's collapsed cathedral hall, voice low enough that only I could hear it. Whatever's waiting at the bottom of this place, she said, Voss is planning to use you the second things go wrong. I heard him briefing the vanguard. He wants Drayson to bait the boss into a heavy hit deliberately so you can trigger the toll on command. My stomach dropped somewhere around my boots. He wants Drayson to get hurt on. I should have felt something like gratitude hearing that Drayson trusted me. Mostly what I felt was sick. This was exactly what I'd promised Ren I wouldn't let happen, and here it was happening anyway. 3 floors underground in a dungeon that ate top 10 guilds for breakfast, because a guildmaster wanted a ranking upgrade badly enough to gamble with his own people's blood to get it. We didn't get the chance to argue strategy any further, because the floor gave out from under Ivy without warning. A section of pulsing ground simply opening like a mouth, and something came up through it that hadn't been in any of the scouting reports. It was tall, taller than the bone canter, taller than anything I'd healed my way through. A boss-tier construct made from the failed equipment of every team the Cradle had ever swallowed, and standing in front of it felt like standing in front of a graveyard that had decided to get up and walk. It grabbed Ivy before anyone could react. The cold, sinking certainty that this thing was built to survive exactly the kind of hit I'd just thrown at it, because it was made from the corpses of people who'd already tried. Again, Voss was shouting somewhere behind me, and there was no mistaking the tone now, no pretending it was concern for his people. Get him another target, now, whatever it takes. That's when Drayson did something I'd never done before. Strong enough to block. He chose not to. Deliberately taking a hit meant to cave in armor and turning it into the single worst injury I'd ever had to look at, because he decided, in the space of half a second, that the guild needed the toll paid in full more than he needed to walk away clean. He hit the ground in pieces of what used to be a battle-hardened S-rank vanguard, and for one horrifying moment, I genuinely thought I was too late, that Voss's gamble had finally cost exactly what Ren warned it would. Rowan, Ren's voice, sharp, right beside me, an arrow already nocked and aimed at the warden's exposed core. Do it now. Whatever it costs, do it now. I dropped to my knees next to Drayson Thorne, hands shaking, and I put everything I had left into healing a wound that should not have been survivable, and this time, was reaching into something inside me too, some deeper well I hadn't known existed until that exact moment. The strike that came out of it wasn't a wave, it was a detonation. It hit the Huskwarden's fused core dead center, and the entire construct came apart at once. Decades of stolen armor and stolen lives unraveling in a single blinding pulse of black light. Pieces of it raining down across the pulsing floor, like the dungeon itself was weeping scrap metal. The silence afterward was the loudest thing I have ever heard. Drayson was breathing, barely but breathing, the wound sealed shut under my hands, his eyes fluttering open just long enough to focus on my face. Told you, he rasped. Voice wrecked but somehow still smug. I'd never call you dead weight again. I laughed and it came out half a sob. On command, with a proper target selected in advance, I looked at him standing in a field of scrap metal that used to be dozens of dead adventurers' armor, to a man who'd nearly died proving a guildmaster's theory correct, and something in me that had spent 6 months quietly absorbing, can't. Not like that. Not ever like that again. Voss's expression flickered, annoyance breaking through the calculation. Vale, do you understand what we just achieved? Do you understand what this means for the guild standing? I understand exactly what it means, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected, steadier than I felt. It means you were willing to let Drayson die to move up a ranking list. It means the second I said no to your little arrangement in your office, you were going to report me as an unregistered anomaly and let the committee handle the rest. So no, I'm not going to be your on-command weapon. The whole squad had gone quiet, watching this unfold. And for the first time since I joined Ashvane Company, I wasn't the one people were staring at with pity or mockery. I was the one people were staring at wondering what I'd do next. For what it's worth, she said, loud enough for the whole squad to hear. I'm with him, whatever happens next. Drayson, still catching his breath on the ground, managed a weak, ragged laugh. Add me to that list. Somebody's going to have to carry me out of here anyway. Might as well be the guy who just saved my life twice. Voss looked around at his own squad. At the officers and vanguard he'd spent years building loyalty with and found most of them looking anywhere but at him. That's the thing about ambition built on other people's blood. It works right up until the people bleeding start doing the math themselves. This isn't over, Voss said, and there was a warning in it, thin and brittle, the sound of a man who just watched controls slip through his fingers and hadn't yet figured out how to get it back. The committee will cleared, a story that would rewrite Ashvane Company's ranking within the week, and a guildmaster who now knew with absolute certainty that the weapon he'd been planning to leash had just decided it wasn't anyone's weapon at all. What none of us knew yet, walking out through that bruised, pulsing gate into ordinary daylight, was that the ranking committee had already heard rumors about an unclassified support anomaly clearing. Karen Castellan didn't knock. That's the detail that stays with me the longest. Looking back, she walked straight through the front doors of Ashvane Company's guild hall like she already owned the building, 2 silent escorts flanking her, and a sealed writ in her hand with the ranking committee's crest burned into black wax. Voss was mid-sentence in the officers' hall, still writing high off the cradle clear, still practicing the version of the story where he came out looking brave, when the doors slammed open and every conversation in the room died at once. I felt it before I saw her. That's the part that scared me. Some instinct buried under 6 months of being ignored sat up straight and screamed, "This is the danger Ren warned you about," and, for Ashvane Company specifically. I watched Voss's face do something ugly and fast. The exact math Ren had warned me he'd do, calculating how much of me he could give up to save the guild's reputation. It didn't take him long. Of course, he said, we're happy to cooperate fully, whatever the committee requires. Good, Castellan said, and finally looked at me directly, and I understood in that one look that she'd already decided I was the only interesting person in the room. Then you won't mind if I take Vale somewhere private and see exactly what he is. Because it was designed to contain a fight without letting it spread past the walls, and a single wounded practice construct standing motionless in the center, built specifically to be healed and hurt without consequence. Castellan stood at the edge of the ward line, arms folded, and gestured at the construct like she was asking me to pass a salt shaker. Standard procedure, she said. You heal the construct, I observe the mechanism, we determine classification. This can be simple, or it can be complicated. And complicated involves a lot more paperwork for both of us. Or when a guild officer tried to keep them out, I found out later, Drayson told the officer, quote, that he'd personally escort him through a wall if he didn't step aside. Nobody stepped in his way twice. Fine, I said, because there wasn't a version of this where saying no worked out better. Simple version. I walked to the construct, put my hand on its chest, and cast the spell the way I would on any wound that wasn't life-threatening. Small, controlled, the kind of healing that used to embarrass me in front of the whole guild. The wound on the construct's chest closed slowly, painfully slowly by any normal healer standard, and nothing happened. No black veins, no retali by any normal healer standard, and nothing happened. No black veins, no retali crawls of the kind of in. Mechanism doesn't trigger below a certain threshold of injury. She tapped a small crystal device against her palm, recording something I couldn't see. We're going to need to see the actual mechanism, Vale, not the version you use to look harmless. That means someone gets hurt, I said flat. That's usually how you test a healing class, Castellan said, unbothered. Fortunately, I came prepared. She gestured, and one of her silent escorts stepped forward and without a word of warning drove a blade cleanly through his own forearm. I froze. He didn't even flinch. Blood welled up dark and immediate, and he simply held the wounded arm out toward me like he was handing me a tool, expression completely blank, the kind of blank that told me this wasn't the first time he'd volunteered for something like this. He's registered for exactly this purpose, Castellan said, at my hesitation. Consensual, contracted, healed, full. Don't hesitate now. Ren's face was harder to read, careful and still, but she didn't look away either. I put my hands on the wound, and I stopped holding back. The black climbed my arm immediately, faster than it had that first time in the swamp. Easier now, like my body had learned the shape of the thing living inside my class and stopped fighting it. The wound tore itself free of the man's forearm in a thin dark ribbon, and instead of a monster 15 feet away, it slammed harmlessly into a warded practice dummy, set up specifically to absorb it. The dummy detonated into scorched fragments across the far wall. The man's arm was whole, not even a scar. He flexed his fingers once, expression still blank, and stepped back into position like nothing had happened. Against the air, the black marking you get during activation, it's supposed to recede completely afterward, every time. That's the baseline function. But every anomaly class case on record with your specific signature shows a pattern, and everything to do with the very specific, very clinical way, she said permanently. How much is a little, I said. Ask him to check your left forearm, Castellan said, nodding at the silent escort. Under the sleeve, 3rd Division Standard Field Kit includes a scanning charm for exactly this. The escort walked over without being asked twice, pressed 2 fingers to a small brass charm and traced it slowly up the inside of my forearm, the one that had gone black past the elbow 3 days ago, healing Drayson in the cradle. I felt a faint, cold tingle where the charm passed, and the escort's expression, blank the entire session, finally flickered into something like surprise. There's residual marking, he said, glancing at Castellan. Eventually it isn't your arm anymore, Castellan said. It's everything, and the historical cases where that happened didn't end well for the people wearing the marks. She said it without cruelty, which somehow made it worse, like she was reading me a weather report instead of a countdown. I'm telling you this not to frighten you. I'm telling you because you're going to keep using this power one way or another, whether the committee sanctions it or not. Ashvane Company is not equipped to manage that. Nobody without direct committee resources is. I stood there in a warded chamber with a healed stranger's blood still faintly staining my hands, staring at a permanent black line on my own arm that I hadn't even known was there until an investigator with a scanning charm pointed it out, and I felt something in my chest that I hadn't let myself, and a boss fight that turned a bully into someone who trusted me with his life. I felt scared, actually scared, not of Castellan, of the thing living under my own skin. Behind the glass, I saw Drayson say something sharp to the guild officer who tried to keep him and Ren out earlier, saw him physically step past the man toward the chamber door, and I heard faintly Ren's voice cut through the tension. That's enough testing for one day, she said, loud enough to carry, already moving toward the entrance. He's, but not a specimen. Castellan held up a hand without even turning around. And somehow that single gesture was enough to stop both Ren and Drayson at the threshold. Some quiet authority in it that made even 2 S-rank fighters hesitate. More demonstration, she said to me, ignoring them entirely. Controlled release. I need to confirm you have baseline control over activation threshold, not just reactive triggering. Can you initiate the mechanism? And demanding somewhere to go, except this time there was no wound, no injury. Just me, standing in a warded room, trying to summon the black on command like it was a party trick instead of whatever it actually was. Nothing happened at first, just an uncomfortable pulling sensation behind my sternum, like trying to flex a muscle I didn't fully know how to locate. Then, slowly, faintly, a thin trace of black crawled up 2 fingers on my right hand, weak, barely visible, and a tiny controlled pulse of dark light no bigger than a coin, flickered, finally clicking into a shape she'd been assembling for a long time. Controlled low-output activation confirmed, she said, tapping notes rapidly now. That's significant. Most anomaly class casualties on record couldn't do that. Purely reactive trigger, no deliberate control. She lowered the crystal device, finally, and looked at me directly, and for the first time since she'd walked through the guild hall doors, her expression softened into something almost close to respect. You're not what I expected walking in here, Vale. Trash healer, who accidentally became a war crime. I said, yeah, I get that a lot lately. Something that might have been the start of a real smile crossed her face before she smoothed it back into professional neutrality. The committee's official position on unregistered anomaly classes is straightforward. You get logged, monitored, and with a committee investigator on record. That's the official position, I said carefully, which means there's an unofficial one. Castellan's mouth twitched, almost amused. You catch on fast. She stepped closer to the ward line, lowering her voice slightly. Not quite private, but clearly not meant for the observation gallery either. There's a unit. Capital sanctioned, small, off the standard ranking ladder entirely. We don't. Your guildmaster was already planning before I walked in that door. You'd be monitored, yes, but monitored by people who actually understand what you are, instead of people trying to figure out how to profit off it. And if I say no, I said because I already knew, deep down, that there was always a version of this question with teeth in it. Then you get registered as an unmonitored threat, Castellan said plainly, no theatrical weight to it, which somehow made it land harder, not a punishment. A classification. It means every guild in the capital gets a flag on your file warning them you're an unregistered risk requiring supervision they're not equipped to, warning them you're an unregistered risk requiring supervision they're not equipped to, warning them you're an unregistered risk requiring your warning of cool. Side, which functionally means no guild will touch you without committee oversight anyway, except now you're doing it with none of the protections and all of the exposure. Rival guilds like Draven Concord specifically hunt talent flagged that way. Veil. Ambitious, powerful, and legally unprotected is exactly the kind of profile certain guilds go out of their way to poach. The name meant nothing to me in that moment, just another guild I'd never had reason to think about, but I'm not sure. I noticed the way Castellan's jaw tightened slightly when she said it, like it cost her something to bring it up at all, like there was history there she wasn't fully sharing. That's not a real choice, I said. One option is a leash, the other option is a target painted on my back. Welcome to being an anomaly, Castellan said, without a trace of sympathy, though something underneath the words suggested she understood exactly how unfair that sounded. Not going to pretend either option is good. I'm going to tell you the truth, which is more than most people in your situation. Unit is a leashier for away and you wisted the city that comes with actual protection attached to it. You have 3 days to decide. After that, the committee makes the decision for you, and you will not like the version where I'm not the one making it. She turned to go, escort falling into step behind her, and paused at the ward line's edge, glancing back at me one more time with an expression I couldn't fully place, something caught between professional distance and a warning she wasn't technically supposed to give. She held my gaze for one more second, like she was deciding how much to say and choosing deliberately to stop short. You should think very carefully about which choice actually keeps you. Escort trailing behind her, and the chamber door sealed shut with a quiet final click that felt a great deal heavier than it should have. I stood alone in the warded room for a long moment after she'd gone, staring at the faint black line tracing up my forearm. The first physical proof that this class was quietly, permanently rewriting something inside me every single time I used it to save someone I cared about. Days to choose between a leash with protectors and a target with none. And somewhere underneath both options, an investigator's half-finished warning about a bloodline pattern she hadn't fully explained, buried for longer than either of us had been alive. The observation gallery door opened before I could fully process any of it, and Drayson and Ren came through together, both moving fast, both clearly furious on my behalf, in ways that would have surprised me 6 months ago, and now just fell. Days to pick between a leash and a target, I said. Committee unit with resources and oversight, or unmonitored threat status and every guild with a grudge and a checkbook lining up to poach me before I get hurt worse than I already am. That's not a real choice, Drayson said, echoing exactly what I'd told Castell in minutes earlier. That's what I said too. Ren's expression had gone thoughtful, the careful, calculating look she got before she started planning something. Whatever you decide, she said, you're not deciding it alone, and whatever Voss tries to do with this to save his own reputation, we're not letting. Speaking of which, he's going to try to spin this to the committee as a guild asset negotiation the second that door opens. I'd bet my bow on it. She was right. Voss came through the chamber door a full minute later, expression already rearranged into the careful diplomatic mask he wore for sponsors and officials, and the first words out of his mouth confirmed exactly what Ren predicted. Rowan, he said, warm, entirely too warm. I think there's real opportunity here if we play this correctly with the committee. If Ashvane Company were to formally sponsor your registration, position ourselves as your guild of origin in any official capacity going forward. That's leverage, sponsorship rights, exclude of origin feel. Of everything I just learned about permanent scarring and buried historical patterns, because Voss actually stopped talking. You don't get to negotiate anything about my future to the committee, not after what you tried to pull before the cradle, not after what Ren told me you were planning to do. Thank you. With Drayson as bait, Voss's jaw tightened, calculation flickering behind his eyes, weighing how hard to push. Whatever he saw in my face, in Drizzen's, in Ren, made him decide against pushing further, at least for now. This is bigger than guild politics, Vale, he said instead, quieter. The committee doesn't make offers like this to people they don't consider significant. Whatever you decide, understand that this is the beginning of something, not the end of it. He left without waiting for a response, and I noticed, watching him go, that for the first time since I'd known him, he looked less like a man calculating his next advantage, and more like a man who genuinely didn't know how this story ended. And a permanent mark climbing my arm, that whatever Castellan had almost told me wasn't the kind of thing that stayed buried for long. I was right. It wouldn't even take 3 days.